Okay, let's talk about some lighting. Now, if we go to our project here, let's go into our sequences folder. I've made a couple of other folders in here that are similar to the project structure that I did under the shots, because I found for this project, I'm just doing everything under the sequence level. The only thing that's going to change is footage is going to be rendered into each of these footage folders for each shot. Let's go back up here. So I've got a reference folder here, and I built a little reference PSD file. But let's go ahead and open this file here. You can't get better reference than the actual shots that you're trying to light. I just built this quick little contact sheet just to give myself some ideas of what this could look like. And I'm actually going to go in a slightly different direction, I think. I'm going to play the television light more like an animated texture. So we'll talk about that in another chapter, where I'll show you how to build an image sequence to use as a texture map on an area light. I'm going to keep the outside, instead of it being daytime out here, it's probably going to be more like nighttime. So something more like this. Maybe like early evening where I've got light coming in from the window, and I'll use an HDRI. I'll show you that in a little bit. And then we'll have the TV light. Probably the TV will be the key light in most of these shots, just like it is in this. But I'm going to have a little bit of a darker feel overall. And so usually you'll be given some sort of contact sheet, or the art director might prepare some work for you to launch. Again, I mentioned that I've previously gone through and done some lighting on this sequence. So what I'm going to do now is actually just hook all of that up for now. So here are the lights that I've created. The ones that we're going to talk about first are the sky dome and the quad window lights here. So let's go ahead and go back to the viewer. Let's go down here and disable our, so if we're looking around our local camera, I'll actually just go to the perspective view here for a second. If we zoom out, you're going to see that having a sky dome here, this is an HDRI sky dome light. If you're going to make one of those, you just right click and add. And instead of Arnold Sky Dome, you have to go up here to Arnold HDRI Sky Dome. If we go to material, you've got two different shaders showing up in here. You've got the light shader, which you normally see with a Sky Dome light. And then you have this additional image shader. And this is where you hook up your texture map. And so you can see here, I've just hooked up a rooftop HDRI texture map that I happen to have photographed myself. And I'm not going to go into the creation of this HDRI, but needless to say, this is what this looks like. And this is just the rooftop of a parking garage. Shot some HDRI, stitched it together here in Nuke. If you look at any one of these images here, there's actually a Make HDRI plugin that I downloaded. It's an OSL plugin. I think I found it on Nukepedia or something like that, but it's pretty cool and seems to work pretty well. But anyway, the result of that is this HDRI map, and you can download whatever or use whatever maps that you happen to have. Let's step down the exposure, and we can see we've got some high dynamic range values here. You know, we've got some light sources up here and a nice soft sort of glow for twilight in the sky. But I want to also point out that we've got these lamps. So I have this version here, and then I ended up doing this version here where I clamped out those lamps. And what I did there was I just made a big roto shape and dropped in a clamp node with that as a mask, so that that just gets rid of those extra values. And I'll show you why I needed to do that in a sec. So sometimes you're going to start from an HDRI map and it's going to do what you want mostly, but oftentimes you're going to have to modify it. What I'll do is jump back over here and I'll show you what those looked like. So, and I mentioned those two quad lights. These are just portal lights, and if you make any kind of a quad light, as a reminder, under geometry you want to click this portal checkbox. They're really just used to help the renderer sample this dome light. So you can no longer use these lights for just normal lighting. They're really just, you place them in windows to get the renderer to do better sampling. So I've placed one here in this back window, and then I've also placed one in the living room here, which is this one here. As a side note, the AOV channel doesn't work for these once they're a portal light. It actually just returns this sky dome light. Just solo these three and go ahead and I'm going to first of all change this to HDRI version 4 because that's the file that had those lights in it. And I'll just render this before and after just to show you. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and render this in all 5 shots, and that way you guys can see what it's doing in each of these shots. So I'm going to make lots of use of this tool. So let's start multiple renders again. Okay, those have come back. And now you can see there's quite a big difference in the result that we're getting with this HDRI light. I do want to mention that out of the box, the light didn't just immediately look like this, but this is quite nice. I want to show you how I ended up getting to this. there's really not that much to it. So you can see here, when I click on my Skydome light, I did increase the intensity. You'll see that I assign this to light 01 because that's going to be our first light channel. It's interesting that when you go to the AOVs, you don't have as much noise in the render here. So how would I iterate on something like this? Well, I could either run 5 live renders, or I could just do 1 for now. Before I do that, actually, you have to make sure you go to your Scene Explorer window, and you want to make sure that you have interactivity turned on. So go to your light here and then shift click on this column here. You're going to enable interactive updates for live renders. Actually, I also want to make sure that I'm on the right shot. So we're going to iterate on shot 1020. Okay, here's our live render. It came back. Now remember, I'm also recording this course, which slows my machine down a little bit. And I could probably go to a quarter res, which would probably help me as well. But let's say I was going to reset this light here. So I'm going to just control left click on that to reset the intensity. You can see it's really dark, right? That's how it came out of the box. And also, you go back to object here. I did rotate it. So let's go back to the default rotation. You know, even faster than iterating on the intensity and exposure is to actually use the viewport exposure compensation. So if you hit control and then up arrow, you can see it's telling you how many stops up you need to go. And so if I'm 5 stops up here, then I can just put an exposure of 5. Or I prefer to use intensity. Just either way is totally fine. If you want 5 stops up in intensity, you've got to double this 5 times, right? So 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. There you go. And then you just click on this to reset it. And now you're going to have an updated intensity here. So real quick way to get that. And then just iterate on the rotation, you know, start rotating it around. If you want to, you could drop this back down here and interactively work on it. So if you went to like your perspective view or something, just select your Skydome from your gaffer. You also have to make sure you've selected it in your Scene Explorer. And actually, that's another good point here. So you'll see in my gaffer, there's something called Sync Selection in and out. By default, it's turned off. So as I'm clicking here, I'm not selecting anything in my lights in my Scene Explorer. You want to turn this to in and out. And then as you select here, it updates your selection in your Scene Explorer. So then you can just use interactive tools, just rotate it around. And as you rotate it, you'll see you get a different result in your live render. So that's one way you can iterate on things. I ended up landing on 30 degrees just because I like typing in round numbers, but I thought it looked pretty good. I'm going to move the monitor window back up here because I want to show you something. So if you notice, there's a lot of noise in this render. You can see all these little white fireflies everywhere. And if you go to the LPE for light 1, you'll see that a lot of those fireflies go away. But what I want to point out is that on the wall, you'll see a shadow being cast by a light source through the window onto the wall. And it's actually quite high on the wall. You can see one up here as well. That's where I determined that these are actually coming from those lights. So that's why I blocked them out and output another version of this file. If we go back over to here, let's go ahead and update our Skydome light. Back to version 5 here. And there you can see that those light sources are now not casting a shadow. So again, sometimes you just need to modify your HDRI. It's going to give you most of what you want, but not everything. I was reminded of one setting I forgot to tell you about. Arnold Global Settings, under the texture system, you need to enable this checkbox, Texture Auto Generate TX. By default, this is turned off. And so if you select an HDRI texture map for your Skydome light, for instance, and it's a .exr or whatever file format, it's probably not going to work unless you check this to on. Otherwise, you would have to manually create your TX files for all texture maps. So it's just handy to turn this on.